The final Cavs whip around before the All-Star break is here. I sit down with Chris Hine of the Minnesota Star Tribune to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves, and fan favorite Sean Woodley comes back for the fourth time as we talk about the Cavs' final matchup of the season with the Toronto Raptors. All that straight ahead on this whip around edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like 92.3 The Fan, my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first, or in this case, maybe second listen of the day. You can find us anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Make sure you drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a good review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode, of course, brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Of course, again, $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. Also need to let you know about the Locked On Cavs daily newsletter, your one-stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That is LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Cavs newsletter. Super excited about today's show. And if you are new to Locked On Cavs, I know there have been a lot of new listeners over the last week or so with the DeAndre Hunter news. And I just want to say this show is a little bit different than the other ones that you've heard. So a thing that I've been doing just about every single Monday this season is I talk with people that cover the teams the Cavs are going to play. So this episode is a little bit less focused on the Cavs, a little bit more focused on the opponents that they will be seeing. So this week, of course, they've got Minnesota tonight. They've got Toronto on Wednesday. So I bring in the people that know those teams better than I know those teams. I can tell you a lot about the Cavs. I can talk about how the Cavs match up with these teams. And I like to think I do that on an everyday basis, but this is an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the teams the Cavs are facing from the people that know them best. So on today's show, I've got Chris Hine, who does a great job, is a very good friend of mine. If you don't know, once upon a time, I used to cover the Timberwolves. I lived in Minnesota for about 2 years. I covered a couple of seasons of Wolves basketball. It's a very strange team. It is the weirdest team in the NBA. Chris and I talk about that a little bit. We talk about Anthony Edwards this season. We also talk about the book that Chris wrote on Anthony Edwards. So if you want to pick up a copy on that, if you're a big NBA fan, big fan of Anthony Edwards, a link to that is in the show description here. So make sure you check that out. It's available for pre-order now, but really enjoyed the conversation I had with him. It's great to catch up with a friend. And also Sean Woodley comes back for what I have to think, other than people that cover the Cavs, really other than Spencer Davies, has to be a record for guests since I've taken over Locked On Cavs. I believe this is the fourth time Sean has come on. We talk about the Raptors, what they did at the trade deadline in terms of who they traded away, what he expects the team to look like with Brandon Ingram when Ingram does get back and playing, and what the expectation is for the Toronto Raptors for the rest of the year. So before I send it over to my conversation with Chris and then Sean, I want to remind you to make sure you're subscribed. Everywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, subscribe both places. I don't care. Do that. And if you're liking the show on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs. And here comes my conversation with Chris Hine. But first, I've got to tell you about my underwear, because of course I have to tell you about my underwear, because I'm wearing Skims underwear. It's the best underwear that I've worn. It is something I would recommend to everybody. When I heard that Skims was making underwear for men, it's like, you got to be kidding me. That's not, no way. Well, then I got a couple pairs, and let me tell you, I want to get a couple more pairs, and then a couple more pairs after that, because it's the best underwear that I've ever worn. I'm so used to underwear, bunching up on the sides, being uncomfortable. You always have to readjust. It's just never a fun time, right? Well, it's not that with Skims. Keeps its shape. It's the best. The material is fantastic. Could not recommend this underwear more highly than I do. You notice, if you're watching on YouTube, I've been staring at the camera the whole time, so I'm not looking at the script. This is coming from the heart. I love this underwear, and you'll love this underwear if you give it a try. So if you want to give it a try, head on over to Skims Men's. That's SKIMS Men's at skims.com. Again, SKIMS skims.com or in Skims stores, and let them know that we sent you. So after you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. Plus, if you're looking for the perfect gift for your Valentine's, not too late, running out of time, but it's not too late, or maybe for yourself, Skims just launched their best Valentine's shop ever, available in sizes for women, men, kids, even pets. Get your pet something from Skims. Why not? But like I said, it's the best underwear I've ever worn. I think you'll like it too. So head on over to skims.com. That is skims.com. And you can enjoy your underwear the way I do. I have no doubts about that. Head on over to skims.com. And joining Locked On Cavs for the first time is a good friend of mine, Chris Hine, also the favorite sports writer of Carole King, believe it or not. But Chris does a great job covering the Minnesota Timberwolves for the Star Tribune up there. And Chris, this Wolves season has been, I think, different than anyone imagined it would be. There have been a lot of ups and downs, and I think that just is who the Minnesota Timberwolves are always going to be organizationally. But they didn't make a trade before this past week's trade deadline. Why do you think they stood pat, and do you think that was the right decision?
It was a combination of them being in the second apron, not really a lot of flexibility to make moves. So, you're limited in terms of how you can aggregate salaries, things like that. And I think internally they have some belief in this team as different as that may be for the fan base at times to watch. There's a belief that this team kind of is putting it together, or was putting it together prior to Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle both suffering injuries here. And they are 8-2 in their last 10 games here. They've been winning at a decent clip kind of since the calendar turned to 2025 here. And we've seen this before here in Minnesota with Chris Finch teams. There is precedent for teams needing 20 to 40 games to kind of figure out how to play together, how to play within his system. And then the second half of the season, kind of January onward, they tend to be better than they were the first half of the season. So I think you're seeing some of these elements coming together right now. This is why they didn't make a move. And I just think overall in the offseason, they'll be in a better place related to the aprons and the luxury tax and all those things. Julius Randle's contract situation they'll have some definitive answers as to whether or not he's going to opt in or not to a player option that he has for about $30 million. And they'll know if this draft pick that they have from the Pistons is going to convey this year. And there's a chance, given how well the Pistons are playing this year, that pick does convey this year. So a lot more answers in the offseason that'll, I think, make it a busier offseason for them as opposed to the trade deadline.
So obviously this is the team that looks much different than they did last year because of the Karl-Anthony Towns trade to New York. Julius Randle comes back. Been a bit of a clunky fit, I think it's fair to say, offensively. Not that last year's version of the Wolves were some great offensive team. They got it done defensively despite having some really good offensive weapons. But what is it about his fit on this team that the front office still does believe in? And I know he's injured right now, and that is something to think about too. But what is it about their belief why do they think this can work well?
There's a history between Julius Randle and Chris Finch. They spent time together in New Orleans when Finch was an assistant, and Randle came away from that experience raving about Chris Finch. When in the first few press conferences he did, he couldn't say enough nice things about him. So there's a relationship and a trust that already pre-existed between Julius Randle and Chris Finch. And right around Christmas, I remember we were talking to Julius Randle about his role on the team, his fit on the team, and how right around that moment of the season, the team came to him and was saying, if you can be more of a distributor first and look for your shots second, that might be what this team needs to function properly, because they like Randle's ability to create open shots for his teammates when he draws a crowd in the paint, and he has a good ability to pass out of that. So, and actually, when you look at those comments in the 6 weeks or so after that, the Timberwolves have the number 5 offense in the league since January 1st. So this kind of shift in mindset and mentality that Julius Randle underwent, and his willingness to take on that role, maybe at the expense of his own shooting and scoring, has helped the team overall prior to his injury. He was playing some of his best basketball, I think, right before he got hurt. And overall, it's benefited the team as a whole because, they look like a much different offense the last 5-6 weeks than they did prior to that.
How does that specifically benefit Anthony Edwards? Because when I think when everyone thinks of the Minnesota Timberwolves, they rightfully think of that guy first. What has his season been like playing alongside Julius Randle?
His December was probably not where he wanted it. His averages were all down across the board. And shortly thereafter, he was complaining about, in a clip that went viral, about all the double teams he was facing, how hard it was on a night in, night out basis to deal with all the attention that he was getting. So I think Julius taking some of that burden off of him to be a facilitator in the offense, to create open shots. And so Ant didn't always have to do it, was helpful. I think with Ant, he figured out this is what he does. He'll complain about the double teams, and then he goes out and figures out a way around it. It's not as if he wasn't getting double teamed in previous seasons. He very much was, especially in the playoffs last year. And he always found a way to get his teammates involved and produce for himself around it as well. And he got back to that. I think he just needed to vent some frustration that particular night. And he came in, the facility the couple of days after that and was like, yeah, that wasn't really me. I'm going to get back to focusing in and drilling in on what I do well. So ever since then, again, the month of January, huge for him, averaging over 30 points a game. He got banged up the other night against Houston, missed the Portland game on Saturday, but in a back-to-back with Chicago and Portland, he scored 49 points and then 41 points. So Ant has gotten back to being Ant. And whether that's taking threes, whether it's driving to the rim, he's getting to the foul line at a much higher rate than he was earlier in the season. He's really back to, I think, maybe taking that next step that people thought he was going to take at the beginning of the season. It just has taken a couple months for that to set in.
So aside from covering the actual basketball team on a day-to-day basis, you also recently completed a book about Anthony Edwards and his sort of rise to stardom. That book available for pre-order right now, I believe, right?
Yes, everywhere you can buy books.
So
yep.
The link will be in the episode description. If you know Chris, you might not. I do. This book is going to be great because Chris is great at what he does. So make sure you check that out. Give that a pre-order. But what was from the reporting that you did for that book? I know you spent a lot of time around people that really know him. What was your favorite thing that you learned during reporting this book? Not to give away too much. I don't want you to give away all the secrets.
There is one anecdote that I want to save for when people read it. That is probably my favorite, but I don't want to give it away in any podcasts or interviews that I do prior to the book coming out. But I will say, I think the favorite thing that I learned, one of my favorite chapters of the book was the chapter about his high school years. And he went to this Catholic high school, Holy Spirit, in the Buckhead area of northern Atlanta, very kind of upscale part of town, a different part of town than where he was from. And just all that he went through there, and talking to this person, Rachel Little was her name, who was a registrar there, but she was so much more than just a registrar for Anthony and a lot of kids that went there, especially those that were international students and athletes. She was kind of looked after them, made sure that they were getting what they needed, staying on top of their classes. They needed a place to stay, things like that. And so talking to her about the chaotic kind of 2 years that Ant spent in high school at Holy Spirit, and just what that entailed behind the scenes with her job and keeping him on the right track, and doing his homework and sleeping during his lunch breaks, and all this stuff that you never really think about for a high level athlete when they're in high school. But just that peek behind the curtain was just really fun to learn about, and kind of the experience that Ant had in those 2 years was the chapter is literally called Miss Little and the Chaos of Holy Spirit, because it felt like it was a battle every day, she said.
Well, I personally can't wait to read the book. And if you are a fan of just the NBA or Anthony Edwards, it's going to be a must read. And Chris, I'll get you out of here with this, but there is a big decision that is supposed to be coming down very soon as it pertains to the Minnesota Timberwolves. By the time you're listening to this, there might be a decision already publicly made. And that is the ownership dispute between one side of Glenn Taylor, the other side, Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry. What do you expect to happen there? When do we expect to know? What's the latest with that situation?
Yeah, so Monday is the deadline for a 3-panel arbitration panel or 3-judge arbitration panel to issue a ruling on whether Glenn Taylor was right to cancel the last portion of the sale to Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez, or if Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez can proceed to getting league approval to complete the sale of the controlling interest of the Timberwolves. That is what we are expecting. I do not know which way the wind is blowing. I'm not going to pretend to know that. But this has been a years long process that we're finally going to get some clarity on tomorrow. And this particular part has been about a year since Glenn Taylor called off this end of the sale. So it's been a long time coming. Tomorrow is a big day in the franchise trajectory of the Timberwolves, a long time coming for fans of the organization. And yeah, it's gonna be a big day. That's all I can say.
As a mutual friend of ours, Dane Moore, likes to say, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the weirdest team ever.
Yep.
Chris,
Yep.
thanks so much for doing this,
4
man.
years.
Very much appreciate it.
You, Danny. No problem.
Before we get to Sean Woodley, our show is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off and maybe you want to bet on that fourth quarter comeback for your team, or you just think, hey, this guy's going to hit 3-pointers soon, I'm going to bet on that. You can do that with FanDuel. That's how you stay in on the action. Plus, if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine those live bets in a same-game parlay. FanDuel's live betting feature keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three. You never have to feel like you missed your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your one shot at $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And making, I believe, the 4th appearance on Locked On Cavs. I think at this point, Sean Woodley is the most common guest of somebody who covers another team here on this podcast, because the Cavs take on the Toronto Raptors for the 4th and final time of the season on Wednesday night this week. It is their final game before the NBA All-Star break, and they're going to be seeing a Raptors team that looks a little bit different from the team that they've seen recently. Now, Sean, Toronto has played much better basketball since the Cavs have seen them last. They've won a lot of games recently compared to a team that I think started 9-31, if I'm incorrect. What's been different about
8-31
Toronto
actually? 8-31.
8-31. Yeah. Wow, even worse. What's been, before we get into the Brandon Ingram stuff, what has been different about the Toronto Raptors?
Well, the biggest thing that's different is no longer on the team. It's that they got some really good play from their expiring veteran players in Bruce Brown. Kelly Olynyk wasn't expiring, but he was always considered to be a trade candidate. Davion Mitchell was a pending RFA. All three of those guys played really good ball for the Raptors for a month, on top of Scotty Barnes kind of finding his groove, making a defensive leap, which has been really fun to watch. You've seen RJ Barrett kind of find his groove. The team just looking more cohesive and together, and the defense really figuring itself out. For, you can take any sort of 10-game random stretch since the new year, and the Raptors might be #1 in defense in that stretch. They had some really good run of just kind of, using Davion Mitchell's point of attack might and Scotty Barnes' sort of possession swallowing in the back end, and turn it into a really good defense, some better effort from RJ Barrett, Grady Dick, guys who you don't really expect to be good defenders. And then they went and traded Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk and Davion Mitchell at the deadline, and brought in Brandon Ingram, who is obviously better than all of those guys. And I'm sure we'll get into the Ingram trade, but he's hurt right now. And so, yeah, they're working a little shorthanded. They're playing a lot of rookies now. So I'm not sure the team they've been since the new year is really the team they're going to be against the Cavs this week. But that's the kind of the tale of the last month and a half or so for the Raptors, is they figured out how to play defense and got some healthy veteran contributions off the bench, and it led to some pretty competent and fun to watch basketball.
All right, so let's get into the Ingram trade, because that was one of the biggest deals made in the NBA. I know the Cavs made a big trade, acquiring DeAndre Hunter, obviously, which if you listen to this podcast, you have heard tons about that. The Mavericks and Lakers made some sort of trade, I guess. I heard about this Luka Doncic guy going. The De'Aaron Fox trade was a big one, but the Brandon Ingram trade he was one of the biggest names to change places before the trade deadline. What was the thinking for Toronto bringing Ingram in?
Yeah, I know this deal has kind of broken people's brains sort of in like the national media where it's like they're bad and they traded a first round pick. Oh, the humanity. And it's just like, I don't know. If you think about the logic of it, it actually makes quite a bit of sense. This essentially completes the loop of the Pascal Siakam trade for the Raptors. And the Raptors, dating back to when they traded OG Anunoby for 2 NBA level players and Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett, I think they kind of made it pretty clear they weren't really interested in doing this long, protracted hangout in the lottery for many, many years with many bites at the apple type of situation. They didn't really have the luxury of that. Scotty Barnes is going to be on a max deal next year. Emmanuel Quickley's on his second deal. RJ Barrett's on his second deal. Jakob Poeltl's on this team. Like, this was not going to be some long Houston Rockets, like 3-4 years at the bottom waiting to get, accrue all these young players type of rebuild. And this very much falls in line with the Raptors' typical MO of being opportunistic and buying low when there's an opportunity to do it. And Brandon Ingram, he's the second best player on this team now, right? They got their second best player for the Pacers' first round pick next year, which is probably going to be somewhere between 20 and 23 based on how they're playing right now. A second round pick in 2031. Who cares about that? And then Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk, who were not part of the long-term plans. And so, yeah, it's a no-brainer as far as like a buy low acquisition. And he does do a couple things that this team badly needs. He now becomes the single best individual shot creator on the team. He becomes one of the better playmakers on this team. And he helps to offset the burden on the offensive end that Scotty Barnes has had to undertake. He's just not a clear number one guy who can be an every possession engine of an offense. I don't think Brandon Ingram is either, but now they can share the load a little bit. Scotty can be freed up to maybe work towards the rim a little bit more often instead of hanging out in the mid-range like he has a lot of late. Brandon Ingram's going to have to adapt for sure. He's going to have to change the way he plays. He's going to have to be a more eager three-point shooter or a more eager off-ball guy and all of that. But the logic of buying low on a guy who is obviously very talented, who you think you can get a lot out of if you're the Raptors, while also maintaining the course and being bad this season. This is not the Jakob Poeltl trade. They are not pushing for a doomed play-in berth right now. They have made it pretty clear. GM Bobby Webster said on a radio hit on Friday, like, pray to the lottery gods. That's what this is all about right now. They're going to play a ton of rookies down the stretch. They're going to lose a lot of games, and they're probably going to finish with the 5th or 6th best odds at the first overall pick. And, they'll be able to add a very high pick to what is already a more talented core than they had last week and kind of hit the ground running next season when Scotty Barnes' max does kick in with, again, just more talent on hand than they had before. The fit concerns, I think, are very real. What they pay Ingram is going to determine a lot of how this deal shakes out. But the logic of it, I think, is extremely sound and very much in line with the typical Raptors operating procedure of, we're just going to get good players when we can and accrue a bunch of good players. And that's probably going to mean that we're a better team overall as a result of it.
So let's get into the fit aspect of this first, because then I do want to talk about what this means for the rest of this season. Not that it necessarily matters a ton for this week's game against the Cavs, but what do you look like, or what does the ideal partnership between Brandon Ingram and Scotty Barnes look like to you? How does that play out on the floor if everything goes as well as it possibly could imagine?
Yeah, I think the ideal partnership involves a little give and take and some adaptation from both of them, really. If you look at their current shot charts, they're basically the same guy. They love to shoot in the mid-range. They, probably don't get to the rim as much as you would like, and they kind of are reserved to above the break threes when they do take them. No corner threes to speak of. And I mean, Scotty takes more catch and shoots than Ingram does, but in general, neither guy is like a great catch and shoot threat. Scotty, because he can't hit him apparently right now, he's shooting 27% on catch and shoots this year. Oof. That's going to go up, one would think, but it's not been good this season. And Ingram just has been very reticent to take them over his time playing with the Pelicans. And so you're going to have to see a little adaptation. They're going to have to move to different parts of the floor. I think, again, Scotty, he's like a devastating rim finisher. He just doesn't shoot there enough. I wonder if working pick and roll and stuff like that with Ingram is going to help open up some of that. And then Ingram is just going to have to be more willing to play off the ball and take advantage of Scotty Barnes' many gifts as a playmaker, right? Scotty Barnes is one of the single best passers out of double teams, out of the post. When he creates an advantage and draws two to the ball, he's a brilliant passer. There's going to be a ton of opportunity for Brandon Ingram to then kind of second side create off the catch, whether it's with catch and shoot threes, whether it's just kind of getting into his own action. Like, he's going to have to be a little less sticky with the ball. He's going to have to be more eager to move it quickly. And I think, again, these are all questions for the coaching staff. And I don't think they would have made this move if they didn't feel there was some level of buy-in they could achieve with Brandon Ingram. It seems like he wants to be here. He seems excited about the opportunity. And head coach Darko Rajakovic has done a damn good job historically of getting guys to buy in and do things that will optimize their games. RJ Barrett being the clear number one example of this, where he came over from New York and they totally overnight just like streamlined his game entirely and made him an entirely different, way more effective basketball player. I think they're hoping for something similar here with Brandon Ingram to kind of avoid the overlap and the toe stepping that currently Ingram and Barnes have. On defense, I think the fit is really interesting. Ingram's not a great defender, but I do think the idea of just putting a guy who's 6'8" with a 7'3" wingspan next to Scotty Barnes, who's playing all defense level defense over the last month or so, and Jakob Poeltl, who's just a damn solid rim protector. Like, it's going to be hard to have a bad defense with that much size. That's a lot of dude at 3-4-5 for the Raptors. And so I think the fit on defense is a little more seamless. It's a little easier. Where RJ Barrett fits in all here is a very open question. I wouldn't be surprised if they look to move him in the summer, maybe in more like of a roster balancing trade, a 1-for-2 type of thing, just to pick up some depth, maybe a backup center, something like that. But yeah, as far as the Ingram Barnes fit, if they can both adapt and tailor their games to one another a little bit more, which is very much remains to be seen, but I have some optimism they'll be able to achieve it, then I think the fit can really help, especially with Scotty, like not force him to kind of be a thing he's not and let him be more of a thing that he is, which is kind of a jack of all trades, does a little bit of everything very well, and is a damn good play finisher. Working off of Ingram, who's a great creator in his own right and a nice passer, I think it can be a pretty harmonious marriage, again, if they're both willing to adapt to one another.
Right. And I know you mentioned the goal for the team is to sort of pray to the lottery gods for the rest of this year. And a success, I think, for the rest of the season would be, hey, we get to pick Cooper Flagg first overall in June when the draft rolls around. But are there goals set? And I know that Brandon Ingram has not played since early December because of an ankle injury, and I don't know when he's going to be back on the floor. But are there goals set that the Raptors have talked about as far as trying to figure out this season, maybe a little bit what that Ingram-Barnes partnership looks like?
Yeah, I think they want to get some sort of look at it. I don't think we're going to get a ton of Ingram down the stretch, but I think we'll see some of him whenever he's ready to go. Doesn't sound like there's much of a timeline for him to return just yet. But yeah, Bobby Webster said in his availability on Friday that, yeah, like we want to see how it works a little bit. We're not going to rush it. We're not going to, be overly pressed if it takes some time to get there. And I would, if I'm setting the over under on like number of games we see with all of the Raptors starters, quickly Barrett, Ingram, Barnes, Poeltl, like maybe you get 3 to 5 of those games down the stretch of the season, and then they'll kind of, Jakob Poeltl's got a little boo-boo here, and Emmanuel Quickly's going to take a rest for injury management there. Like, I don't think we're going to see the whole complement of guys a ton, but yeah, if Ingram's available and can play 10, 15 games down the stretch, I think they'll be happy to see it, and they'll offset it by playing a whole bunch of rookies off the bench, which will probably lose the minutes enough to lose these games anyway. It is fascinating because their last 20 games, Danny, it's like comically easy. They play the Jazz twice, the Wizards 3 times. They got the Nets a couple times. They have like all of the worst teams stacked at the back end of the schedule after having the hardest schedule in basketball through the first 50 plus games. It's going to make the tanking very difficult. It's going to be a lot of very movable object against very stoppable force down the stretch of the season with these teams trying to lose their asses off. But I think because they're going to play a lot of rookies and not really roll out 40 plus minutes of Scotty and Ingram, to try to win every single minute and win every single game, they'll lose their fair share and still probably finish 5th or 6th in the odds. They have like a 4-game cushion, I think, right now in the 7th place odds. And so it's going to be tough for any team to cut into that. With the Blazers playing well, the Sixers seemingly pushing for the play-in. Who the hell knows what the Bulls are going to do? It does feel like they're pretty comfortable in that 5-6 spot, with some mobility to move up a little further, maybe ahead of the Hornets. If the Hornets now with Mark Williams back to start to go on a run, man, that's weird. So yeah, this will be entirely about losing games, getting run for the rookies. Like this is, to me, a fine way to tank if you're actually going to go get guys who are going to be part of this team for a while, real extensive run. It's not like last year's Raptors where they were rolling out Jordan Nwora for 28 minutes a game and ruining my life every single night. It's going to be a little bit better than that. And I think, they'll be happy they ate their vegetables down the stretch of this season when they add a high pick. Because Danny, like if they add a Cooper Flagg, a Dylan Harper, an Ace Bailey to this team now, things get really interesting really quick next season, particularly Harper. I think Harper would be such a perfect fit on this team for what they need, kind of an ideal backcourt partner for Emmanuel Quickly. Probably means RJ Barrett gets moved in the summer, but that can be a good thing as well to kind of establish some, further depth. Like they're in a position now where if the draft lottery breaks their way even a little bit, the Ingram trade is going to look a whole lot better as a result.
Well, we'll see if that happens when the draft lottery rolls around in May. But as for this week, I think it's a game the Cavs expect to win. I think it's a game the Raptors are probably hoping that the Cavs win. Sean, thanks so much for doing this. And we will, I guess, talk to you next season now on Locked On Cavs.
Yeah, well, I guess like Cavs Raptors conference finals next year. We have that to look forward to with the Dylan Harper experience taking off in year one, and Brandon Ingram being an all-star, and Scotty Barnes also being an all-star. It's going to be awesome, man. Can't wait. It's going to be a thrill.
Yeah, I'll see you in Toronto for that. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first, or maybe in this case, second listen, or both listens of the day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button for me too. Make sure you hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs. And the Cavs take on the Wolves tonight. I will be back tomorrow talking about that and, of course, DeAndre Hunter's debut.